Thank you, Don. So first of all, good to see a lot of you that I've met before. I'm seeing so many familiar faces and names, and the energy is so it's humbling. It's I'm just excited to be with you guys. And look, you don't both Andrew and Julian, who I'll introduce quickly, but these guys are talented. I'm just here to make this fun and interesting and keep the topic. And one of the things I'd like to talk about, generally speaking, our goal today is kind of talk about how power is transitioned within the White House. Because I think it's a big question Don and I get a lot of from our donors and our supporters. Like, well, is Andrew going to be involved in the Biden campaign or in the Biden White House if Biden wins? And so it's always a tough balance because you want to do everything you can to make sure we win, but then you also at the same time want to make sure you do everything you can to be involved if we do win. So today we've got, as the man who needs no introduction is Andrew Yang, of course, my boss and former presidential candidate. But we're also joined by someone special, Julian Ha, who you can read his bio that Don sent out, but he works for a firm called Heidrick Struggles, which when I was at UBS, they were like the kings of executive search. And I believe they still are. They placed the smartest people, the best people at all of the great firms all over the world. And Julian is a partner focusing on government and policy in that world. So whether it's board members or CEOs or folks in the White House or senior level executive talent, Julian knows this market well. And so it's a really exciting opportunity, in my opinion, to hear from these two. So Andrew and Julian, thank you both for being here. Does your audio work? Do we look good?
I hope so.
Yep.
Julian,
look good.
Andrew,
Looking
you're good?
great.
Yeah.
All right.
Looking good.
So here's what I'd like to start with. I think it's kind of on everybody's mind. And I'll start with you, Andrew. We had the vice presidential debate last night. And you went on CNN, Andrew, as usual, and talked about it, but I'm not sure everybody got to see you. So we'll start with you, Andrew, then we'll turn to you, Julian. Thoughts on the VP debate and what you're thinking?
I thought it was a great night for Kamala and the Dems because nothing really changed coming out. And I'm starting to count my chickens. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but the polling that came out after last week, I thought last week's debate was terrible for Trump. He certainly drove away anyone who, let's say, was a suburban woman or like a lot of seniors were like, this is not what we need. And then he got the coronavirus. And that's pretty much been the news for the last week. So polls went from Joe +7 to Joe plus 10, 11, 12 in places like Pennsylvania and Florida. Now, you can take the polls with a grain of salt, but that's enormous. If you have a reputable pollster like Quinnipiac saying that you're down by 13 in Pennsylvania, that's like a pretty bad sign. And so Mike Pence was given an impossible task if the goal was to somehow arrest the momentum. I think he was very good, but very good was not going to somehow transform this race. So because of that, this race is very, very quickly, in my mind, turning into a landslide. Now, again, I'm not supposed to talk like that, but facts are facts, and I do not see anything on the calendar that's going to turn this around. At this point, over 6 million Americans have already voted. Suzanne's talking about how the polls are open in Arizona. They're voting. These debates may or may not happen. They're going to be virtual. There's there's very, very little that can happen between now and election day that's going to change the dynamics. So I thought last night was great on that level.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julian. Yes, please.
I was just going to add, I think Kamala did a great job, but I think the winner of the debate really was the fly. I think we all have to agree that was the one that took the votes. But anyway.
Fly 2024.
You probably saw those swatters that came out, right? Truth over flies. It was on the Joe Biden store. I think it's sold out already. I couldn't get mine. But
we couldn't get one either. We on the campaign, we used to love like the rapid merch stuff. So kudos to the Biden team. If anyone's involved, they have a very good merch store. So I agree with you, Andrew. We shouldn't count our chickens. But let's play this fun between us here. Let's play this fun game and assume high level that we actually do take back the White House. Julian, I'd love you to start in your world. I think a lot of us, and even for people in this space, don't necessarily know how these roles in the White House are filled. Like how the heck you go from a complete Republican administration and then literally within a matter of a month and 3 weeks and change, you flip it all over. So at least like, let's assume you're an idiot like me and know nothing. Like, can you give us a primer on how this operates?
Yeah, sure, Zach. Well, look, first of all, I mean, this is not something that I would say 99.99% of the population is even aware about, right? And frankly, nor should they be, because it's something that just goes on and happens in a normal time, right? So normally, a presidential transition is simply a process whereby the powers of the president of the U.S. are transferred, from the incumbent to the president-elect. Right, that's what we're talking about. But behind that, there are 4,000 plus jobs, right, that are political appointees. Many require Senate confirmation. Others are, at the discretion of the president in the White House, and those are key roles. As it was once said, personnel becomes policy. And I strongly believe that. That's what I do. That's my day job, right? I try to put the right people in the right roles in the right organization. So it's no different from presidential transition, which frankly, if you think about it, is the most disruptive process out there, right? You have, the key roles: running the government, running the machinery, setting policy, keeping their eye on the ball, transitioning. And theoretically in one day. So, and there's not much time between the election and the inauguration, right? There's 70 or so days. So a lot has to happen. That's during a normal period of time when you don't have a pandemic, when you don't have an administration that is clearly going to make it challenging and difficult for its handoff, right? So that's just a little bit of what, by way of background. There are, fortunately, there is actually legislation in place that mandates a transition, let's just say. And that was put in place, enhanced after 9/11, because it became pretty clear that, during times of disruption and transition, our enemies, foreign and domestic, can take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. So there is a mechanism of legislation in place that compels both sides, the current administration as well as the nominee of the other party, in this case, Vice President Biden, to have access to certain resources, personnel, computers, office space, which is not being used right now, of course, so that they can have a process of transition, if there is one, after November 3rd. Let me just pause there because there's a lot to unpack, but I just want to make sure that we sort of have a baseline of understanding.
No, there's a lot. And I don't know, Andrew, if you feel free to jump in any time, Andrew. I feel, I'm sure you have comments on this stuff. My first question is, when that starts, who's making these initial decisions out the gate? Does it go right to Biden? Is there a head of a transition team? Like that feels like the next logical step in terms of the person in charge or the person making the decisions.
Yeah. There is. I'll just address that. And so it's been announced that former Senator Ted Kaufman of Delaware, who's one of Biden's closest friends and succeeded Biden when Biden became vice president to fill his interim seat in Delaware, he is the person at the top in terms of managing transition. But amongst us friends here, there are many other cooks in that kitchen who are also setting up the infrastructure of transition. And there is an AAPI there in that room, Gautam Raghavan, and also recently announced Felicia Wong, who runs the Roosevelt Institute. She is an advisor. But beyond those two that I'm aware of, there isn't anyone from the AAPI community, which is something we've been pushing on in other ways. But there are many other folks, and no surprise that most of the folks are from the Obama-Biden world. Jeff Zients, Johannes Abraham, Avril Haines, Evan Ryan, who's Tony Blinken's other half. These are all folks that if you Google them, you'll see that they've held senior roles in a previous administration. And so within the transition team, they've all been divided into agencies and White House. And what the job of those policy heads or those personnel heads is to start coming up with slates of people that have been recommended to them, that they know of, that could serve in some of those positions on day one.
So, Andrew, we've spoken with Ted. Any insight on what they're looking at? And I know a lot of people are asking what the Biden campaign's talked to you about too, so you can elaborate on that as well. But more curious on the process too with Ted and the conversations you've had so far.
I did talk to Ted, and he said that their plan is to try and plan a transition with no incoming. So what do they mean by that? It's like they don't want people coming and saying like, "Hey, I want this job," or "I've got this person who would be great for this." They think that they can identify the people that they're hoping to fill spots with without having that kind of competitive dynamic. Or the other thing is they don't want to be a distraction. Their first rule is do no harm to the campaign. And so there are two ways I think you could do harm to the campaign. One is if word were to get out that certain people were supposed to do this and that, because that's a bad look. It sends a message also that you're counting your chickens before they hatch. And then, and also it could be a morale killer in terms of the organization and the team, because then people, even while you're in the midst of the race, you're like, you're doing what, what's your job? Like, what's my job? Like, the last thing you want is people having those kinds of thoughts when we should just be grinding in the swing states. So that's what I was told, which makes perfect sense. And so I get the sense that they're trying to develop their slates, but they're trying to do it in a way that's not obtrusive and doesn't require, like, for example, like everyone to drop everything and, interview or do this and that.
Right. So Julian, keep going, I guess. Once they have these slates, is it, typically how are these roles, once they start to they have a short list, how do they start to get placed? And I'd love to know how you start to get involved too. Do they just call you up and say, here's our roles, what do you think? Or, what has your experience been there?
Yeah, so I want to be clear though, I'm not part of the official transition team, right? Yeah. Maybe someday, but I have been, hopefully close enough to some of these folks who I know have been working on this process. But let me also just take one quick step back and mention, I think, a very worthwhile organization that if you aren't aware of, I think you should at least take a look at their website and be familiar with them. And they're called the Partnership for Public Service, right? Max Steyer, it's based in DC. The Partnership for Public Service was started many years ago, and they just had their award ceremony this past week. And what they do is every year they recognize our civil servants, and they hand out awards. It's called Sammys, named after Samuel Heyman, who started the original funding of the group. And they do really worthwhile work. But in addition to the Sammys, they also, a couple of years ago, and I was involved in this, set up the Center for Presidential Transition. And I think that group does really worthwhile work. And if you really want to geek out on transition, just go to that website. And there's a lot of content you can go through. I was part of an effort, along with a few other search firms that we pulled together, to actually draft position specs, like job descriptions of what the 100 most senior positions in an administration, what they actually do. Like people just, they apply, but they don't know what they're actually signing up for, right? Or what the qualifications might entail. So, building out that infrastructure, that kind of historical memory, I think is, really worthwhile. They also have a gentleman there called Dave Marchick, who is recently sort of, running that center. And he does a very good podcast. And I've listened to, I think, almost all his podcasts now. And they interview, Chris Liu, who, as you know, was Obama's head of transition, right? So Chris is somebody who's very well versed and really was inside and ran this process for President Obama back in 2008. But anyway, so I just wanted to make sure people are aware of that resource. The other thing, again, just to put out there is, I think Andrew's absolutely right. The tone that I get is the current official transition folks are working very, very quietly under the radar. They are building sort of the slates, really without trying to distract anybody from the campaign. That said, they have to raise money, and they have a thing called PT Fund, Presidential Transition Fund, which again, I'm not here to plug that, but it is something they have to do. The Romney campaign raised about $8 million. I think that's what this transition team also is looking to do. Frankly, I think they need to raise more. The challenge there is you can only, as a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, contribute 5,000. So the good news is, the good news is you can only contribute 5,000. The bad news is you need a lot of $5,000 checks to get to 8, 10, 12 million, right? And so that's a dynamic that the transition team is also has to work on, because they've got to pay for the people they're bringing on board. To answer your question, though, Zach, in terms of how the magic happens, is my understanding is, again, they brought together experts from all these, again, Vice President Biden has been in this game so long, he has a big alumni club, right? And there are people recognized within his orbit who are experts in defense, domestic policy, security, welfare, health and human services, coronavirus, and so many of the people that I'm sure and we all know are part of that kind of advisory team, and through that they will recommend people. And that's how it's built. So in the end, though, I have to say it is who you know, and there is a bit of advocacy. Even though they said, hey, no, thank you, we'll call you. The reality, again, amongst friends is, the squeaky wheel does get the attention. So that's why, I'm proud to say that we've been doing our best to, like it or not, Andrew, to make sure that you are considered and will be, at least have a right of first refusal for something that could be impactful in a future Biden administration.
Well, thank you, Julian. I do get the sense that politics does require people knocking on the door and being like, hey, keep our person in mind and keep us in mind. So that's not surprising. What it reminds me of a little bit is when the DNC speaker roster came out and we had done zero lobbying for anything in that direction. And then like the list that I was on, I was like, hey, should we be on that list? And then we're like, oh yeah, sure. You were going to be on it in a minute. And then we're like, oh, that's good. But you got the sense that, from what I heard afterwards, was that there were people who were fighting very hard prior to that announcement, not on our behalf necessarily, but like for, like, you name the person. So there was like a learning there. So it's not surprising that that's the process here.
Yeah. We did learn that a bit. I think this is fun. I wanted to quickly interject and share, and then maybe take this down this direction. So Don sent out a survey to all of you who are here, essentially asking, what role do you want Andrew Yang to have in a hypothetical Joe Biden White House? And this was fun. So if you didn't answer it, sorry, but most of you did. And here's the numbers. So 30% of you think he should be the chief technology officer of the United States. 25% of you believe he should be the director of Office of Science and Technology Policy at OSTP. 20% said Secretary of Commerce, and 16% said Secretary of Labor. And then there was 8% for the FCC chair, and one of you voted for Secretary of Housing. Now, which is fun. So basically half of you said something to do with technology. Then the other kind of quarters of you were one form of cabinet secretary or another. My takeaway from this, Julian, was that I think most of us, and no offense to all you voted, but I would be included in this, don't actually have an idea of what these cabinet positions do. And maybe in particular, what other senior roles there are in a White House that are maybe not in the cabinet. So do you mind, as much as you can, like a high level overview, and maybe some of these types of roles, and have to be all of them, but like kind of overview of the difference between like OSTP or a chief technology officer, which I know is like sounds cool, but isn't necessarily a very senior role in the White House. Like the difference in these types of roles and what they would high level be responsible for.
Sure, sure. So I think some of those roles actually are relatively new. I think they were only created under the Obama administration.
Obama, right? Yeah.
And I frankly don't know if they're very robust during this current administration.
The
I'm hard
ones we're
pressed.
thinking of are not, Julian. Like, I don't
Yeah,
even think they even bothered like
that's what I
replacing
mean.
some of them.
Yeah. But it, that's the point, I guess, Andrew, which is, some of these roles, it's what you make of it, right? And if we had someone like Andrew in these positions, I know that with his star power and his charisma and his ability to knock heads together, he could make something of those roles, right? And I think that's true of many of these cabinet positions. Now, again, Chris Liu would be the best one to really comment because he was the cabinet secretary and can really tell you kind of what a house of cards that might have been. But in previous administrations and in current ones, the secretary is more of a titular, figurehead, right? He or she will be out there, the chief cheerleader for whichever agency they are leading. But much of their time also is frankly spent trying to get sure they have time with the president in the White House. I mean, just to be very blunt, that's their job. But that's what they're doing. They're advocating on behalf of their department and their mission, whatever that may be, whether it's commerce, whether it's labor, whether it's something else. So but again, I hope Andrew has a chance to be considered for all those positions because I know that he would make a success of any of them. But in the end, it's who's in that seat, right? Who will have the closest relationship with the president, because that squeaky wheel will get more attention and more of their policy, pushed forward. Andrew, I don't know, not to put you on the spot, but which one would you want? now that the people have spoken.
I spoke to Chris Liu to get a sense of the different positions. My top two picks would be number one, commerce, because it's very broad. You could do a lot of things with it. And you could even install different measurements for the economy and get your fingers into a lot of pies and being like, well, it has to do with growing the economy and making business work better. So you could even include social media in that and a bunch of other things. And then my second would be an enhanced and consolidated version of kind of a new umbrella tech secretary above the CTO and OSTP and the U.S. Digital Service to try and ramp up our abilities. I would want to enlist thousands of technologists, including a new West Coast office, so that people don't feel like they necessarily need to move to DC. Because I think that's a major impediment if you're going to try and onboard tech talent, and amp up the government's abilities to both be able to implement sensible policies in that direction, and also just get better at it itself. So that would be my second choice after commerce.
So I'm going to say we probably got about 20 minutes plus of discussion left. So if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can send them to everybody, or actually send them to everybody because that's fun. And I'll follow on the dialogue. My question is this, Julian. I'd love your perspective on kind of how the White House works. In a sense, I think is interesting because for me, I've worked in a company where this like a CEO has the talent and they empower their leaders within. Are these cabinet secretaries or that level, are they empowered to make their own decisions, or is it kind of like what you're somewhat alluding to? It's all about like you're the president. Like how similar is it to some of the for-profit companies you've worked with and placed talent in, or is this a completely different beast?
Yeah, look, I'll share my perspective, and of course, Andrew, I'm sure you have your point of view as well. But look, it's set by the tone at the top, right? I mean, if we look at the last President Obama, I think he actually didn't really engage with the cabinet too much. I don't think he let his secretaries kind of run their own shows. And for better or worse, and brought them together when it was necessary. Now, of course, there are some that I think he worked much closer with, right? Treasury and defense and whatnot. So those, and Secretary of State and whatnot. So I think there's always, even within the cabinet, there is a ranking order,
Hierarchy,
right?
yeah.
There's a waterfall. I think in this current administration, it's excuse my French, it's a bit of a shit show, right? And it's just, I'll be honest, I don't think it's all about the man in the Oval Office. It's his show, and so I think being a cabinet secretary these days is not that fun. Although I guess you could just go and do your own thing, and as long as you don't outshine the boss, you're good. I'm hopeful that in a Biden administration, there'll be a more thoughtful and balanced, dynamic again. And that's why, again, Andrew, hopefully you can be around that table and create this
Julian,
technology role.
What is this Plum Book that Ivy references? I'm curious. It made me intrigued. The Plum Book.
I think it used to be the color of the cover. It was plum, like sort of plum color. So that's where it came from. But it is I think if you just literally Google Plum Book, you can get a link to this listing of those 4,000 or so political appointee positions that I referred to earlier. And those are all the jobs that an incoming administration needs to appoint. And those are, like I said, it starts with the cabinet and all the White House personnel, but then, drops to deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries, and deputy assistant secretaries. So kind of those 2 or 3 levels. And that's, this is the American patronage model, right? The president and his team get to choose people and reward people who have served loyally on their campaign, usually, or in some other capacity. So those are the president's trusted advisors. And that's where these people are coming from. Now, I'll say one more thing. Beyond the 200 or 300 top positions, the rest of those roles is filled out by an office in the White House called Presidential Personnel Office, PPO. So that's also a pretty key function. The head of PPO and his or her team do what I do, right? They're headhunters, and they are placing people. It's a tough job because for every position you'll get lobbied, 50 or 60 people will lobby you, right? Senators will call you and say, hey, I want my guy or gal in that position, right? I'm calling my chit in, I want that person in. It becomes a kind of a horse trading dynamic that PPO has to contend with. But that's their job. They're constantly filling these positions because people, do these jobs for a year and then they're already moving on to the next one. So there's a lot of churn. You need a good system. The current PPO office is a mess, no surprise. The prior ones were much better.
You should know, Julian, I did talk to Chris Liu, who served as cabinet secretary and managed Obama's transition. So I got to hear a little bit about it. I was trying to get guidance as to what kind of role I should be angling for, and got a sense as the difference between having an agency and head count and budget and all that, or working out of the White House where you're trying to get on the president's schedule and you have a broader mandate, but it's more amorphous. So there are pluses and minuses to both.
Yeah. I mean, even the FEC one, I know, that wasn't in your top 2, but that actually does have outsized influence if you can, set 5G policies, if you can sort of bring back net neutrality and things like that. So again,
yeah, I talked to Julius too. You probably worked with Julius Janikowski, and it was attractive because it has legislative authority and clear boundaries in terms of a lot of people have to listen to the FCC chair.
We had a good laugh on the staff thinking about Andrew Yang as a regulator because he's been an entrepreneur most of his life, and as we all are, so we basically spent a whole bunch of time breaking rules, and then thinking of Andrew setting the rules was a fun experience. So I want to go to one of the questions we got in the chat, which I loved. It's from Tom. So if anyone is looking for a good podcast, Nerds for Humanity is what Tom runs. It's great. Andrew and I both been on, but he also has a number of compelling guests. So thank you, Tom. His question is, I think it's a good one. When you talked about squeaky wheel getting the grease, we have this online. We have an online army in real life army, the Yang Gang, and a number of supporters who don't necessarily consider him Yang Gang, but really love Andrew, or consider themselves Yang Gang, but love Andrew. Is it important for us to organize that to publicly pressure the Biden administration for a role? Like, how would you, in your opinion, Julian, wield that collective power or populism there?
I think, I mean, it's a very good question, Zach, and Tom. I think it is a delicate balance, right? You want to be putting sort of appropriate pressure and reminding folks in that transition team about your ability to serve, what you would bring, the constituents that you represent, the ideas that you represent. But it also, you have to balance that without becoming annoying, for lack of a better word, right? It's that kind of delicate walk
right.
that you have to do. And I think, look, you have a great, base of support, Andrew. And I think if you're able to activate that by having folks, whisper in the right ears, so to speak, right? People who are close to Ted Kaufman, who are close to obviously the vice president or Kamala. And the other thing you have to appreciate, and within transition, you have different factions, right? You've got the Warren folks, you've got the Sanders folks, you've got Kamala's team, right? They all want to make sure that their people have opportunities, because again, personnel becomes policy. And so, and I don't want you left out of that. So, it's perfectly, I think, appropriate to do that. But it's just that finding that right balance, and if you can organize in a unified way, so they're not getting a cacophony of kind of sort of folks attacking them or jumping on them. That might be also powerful, right? You say, hey, look, we're representing thousands of people who want Andrew to have a seat at the table. That might be a strategy that could get their attention.
Right. Andrew, I'm curious your thoughts on this, because at the end of the day, yes, we want you to have a seat at the table and have a voice, but at the end of the day, it's like these roles are jobs that you have to live every day and go to work every day and do. And there's I think a nightmare situation where the Yang Gang like publicly pressures the administration to put you in a role, and then you're stuck doing this job. You're like, I hate this job. I don't even like it. Like, thoughts on balancing the public-private kind of conversations on a cabinet role?
I'm obviously excited to do everything I can to solve the real problems, and it strikes me as a little bit lame to be given an opportunity to possibly address those problems and not go for it. You know what I mean? It's like you can't spend years saying we should do this, and then someone's like, "Do you want to help do this?" and be like, that's not great leadership. I'm excited to see what you can get done within the context of government. I consider myself a very practical, adaptable sort, pretty reasonable person who, gets there and says, okay, what's in my mandate? What can I do? Like, what are my resources? And I think I'm pretty entrepreneurial, where it's like, I think I can get some extra resources through a variety of means, just by like going to people and being like, hey, you want to do this, this thing? And there's like a certain degree of, I think, authority you would bring as, let's say, a member of the cabinet or a senior member of the administration, where people would be like, let's see, Andrew Yang wants me to do this. Like, like the government presumably is something I'd rather keep on my, I'd rather be on their good side than not. So I feel like I could get a lot done, without necessarily just bringing around a regulatory stick everywhere. So I'm looking forward to doing what I can to solve these problems, with like a big mind toward the fact that that we're in like a really desperate place, and a lot of the changes you're looking for are pretty deep and fundamental. So it's like, I'd want to be ambitious if I went in there. There are roles I just probably would not take, because like I'm in a position where I feel like I can maybe get some big things done in any context. It's like. So if I can be part of an administration and actually solve these problems, like, I'll be all for it. And I'm excited about aspects of of it. I'm confident too they're going to find something really substantial for me to sink my teeth into, either commerce or tech or something else. Because knowing Joe and Kamala, there's just so much work to be done right now, you know? And I think they regard me as someone who is a worker, and can actually be trusted. You know, like right now, the Biden campaign has me doing all these like random press appearances, and I'm kind of impressed because there's like some trust there too. It's like, you know, I got all these sorts of weird assignments where I'll just show up and be like, all right. I think it might have been Lou who said this to me. He's like, they're going to want you because they know you're not going to embarrass them. You know, so
It's
like
true.
I'm allowed to walk out on a tree limb and like no one's worried about it.
But that's a really important point. I think, Andrew, being a surrogate for the campaign is really how you stay top of mind, right? Because all those key cabinet roles and sub-cabinet ones, they're going to be filled by people who have developed that bond and trust with the vice president, with Kamala, and their teams. And so those will be the ones that are going to be sort of really considered for those visible positions in an administration. And then some of the other ones will be, you know, reserved for folks who've been supporters, but maybe not as visible. And look, I mean, look, let's be honest, you bring a national name, right? That's really powerful. So I appreciate everyone here trying to hope to help Andrew get there, and it certainly matters. But I think just what you're doing on your own, Andrew, is going to go really far.
So let's talk about people in the community that are not me. You know, if there are folks on this call who are looking, it's like, hey, I'd like to be considered for a role. And one thing I think everyone here is excited about is having a degree of representation in that team. How did people generally get on the radar?
So there's a project that I was privileged to be part of starting a few months ago. It was under the rubric of another PAC and a C4. It's the AAPI Progressive Action, AAPI Victory Fund, right? So credit where credit's due. And there's some people involved in those organizations who've been in the AAPI fight for many, many years. Shekhar Narasimhan, Beldyong Hung, and other names that may be known to some of you. They came up with the idea that we should try to be methodical and pre-vet as many AAPIs, senior AAPIs to start with, that we could then put forward to the transition team. So we started these work streams, back in just at the beginning of summer, around June time, and we would meet once and then twice a week every evening in the evenings to go over names. So we had over about 500 names that were either submitted or that we were sourcing that people would recommend. We'd speak to somebody and they said, well, have you spoken to so-and-so and so-and-so? So that's how we built out our list, Andrew. The co-chairs of that committee were former Representative Mike Honda of California and Seema Nanda, who was the head of the Democratic National Committee. And so Seema and Mike spearheaded that. I was one of the gang of eight on that committee. And so we basically called and reached out and researched all these great names that were sent to us and to develop a list. And of course, you were on that list, and that's one of the ways we got connected. But there are many others that, you know, may not be as well known, to your point, but who could really provide some good service. So that was one channel that at least I was privileged to be part of. I know there's some other groups. Leaders Forum is doing one as well. And then there are some other functional ones, sort of the NAPABA, lawyers putting forward potential judges and justices. So again, there are different organizations, at least within the AAPI community, that have been doing it. The AAPI 46 project that I was part of, I think, I'd like to think we did a pretty good job of putting that together, tying it with a ribbon, and handing it over to Gautam and others in the transition team. And now the challenge and the opportunity is to make sure that they keep looking at that list, right? It's not just sitting there in the inbox and nothing happens. And that's why, as I referenced earlier, I'm also trying to see if I can insert myself into that process at some point.
Yeah, well, we're rooting for you, Julian.
Well, thank you. Maybe you could help me get in. Then I'll make sure you're in line for Secretary of Commerce.
I like it. This is a mutual back scratching. This is the
That's
way
how
it
it
works.
works.
Asians. Pay
This
attention.
is how it works. This is the reality.
Oh my gosh. I haven't I haven't seen a ton of questions. Let me so I'm gonna wrap it in a second. I just maybe a quick one to end on a positive note. Joe Biden and the Biden team have publicly said they want Andrew involved in the administration, which is exciting, and I do believe them as humans, and in terms of their intention is right. Julian, your experience, promises like that ever kept? Is that something every president says? Like how dirty does this fight have to get? Like what do you what does that mean to you signaling wise?
I think it's genuine until it's not, right? And so I think, many promises are made, fewer are kept. And that's why, you do need to keep up the pressure, right? We do need to keep up that reminder, hey, Andrew showed up, he represented you well, he got you over the line. He got, look, it goes without saying, none of this matters unless we have a victory, right? And we've got to get out the vote. We've got to be, to steal Judy Chu's line, we really have become, not just marginalized, but rather the margin of victory, right? So we've got to convert that strategically. And so I'm part of other groups that have been fundraising amongst the AAPI community to try to flip Texas or try to make an impact in some of the other key swing states. So that's the first thing, Zach, right? We got to win. But as we're going through that process, let's remind the campaign folks. Let's remind Ron Klain. Let's remind Jen Dillon that the role that Andrew is playing, and so that's when you hold them to the promise.
Yeah. No, that's a good. It's a good answer, and I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Andrew, I guess last question for you is, if let's hypothetically set. Actually, let me interrupt myself quickly. What is so important is, because Andrew's not a whiner, is that you folks on this call that have connections and friends and family in DC or in government or across the country, putting in a good word or making this stink privately is actually very, very effective. So thank you all who have done that. And those of you who haven't or are doing it, please continue to do so or start. That would be, it's very, very helpful. Andrew, if hypothetically, this is from Tom again, was a good one. If hypothetically you're not in the cabinet, you mentioned some of the things you wanted to be passionate about, wanted to work on. What are the ways you think you can help with Humanity Forward or life outside the White House?
So when I talked to Chris Liu about the experience of various people, one thing he said to me that really struck home to me is that there were some people like got a really great job or really great sounding job, like even secretary of whatever. And then they were in that job and they were like, this job was not as great as I kind of thought it might be. Like it seemed like there was a lot of that going around. I think we all know that, like, I have very low interest in a title. You know what I mean? It's like I want to freaking do some work. And I'm confident that out in the world, there are a lot of things that we can do to move the needle forward. Right now, we're helping all these down ballot candidates, like the great Suzanne Hugg, who I think is still here, Hug for House. But if you have down ballot candidates who are able to win, if you can get real reforms in on a state or local level, like Prop 24 in California around data privacy, I think that's going to end up moving the needle for national legislation. So there are high impact things that one can do right now. Just having a following and being able to generate energy and attention around an issue. I just had a call. You were the part of, Zach, with Tristan Harris, who was part of that documentary, The Social Dilemma. There's so many issues that we have to try and address in the social media front that I think do have to come from government. But sometimes culture leads government. So I'm very happy to stick my nose in the government and just do the work. But no, I think, Tom, you know what I'm passionate about. If for some reason I wasn't part of the administration, Another thing that I think we really need to work on that might be even easier outside of an administration is democracy reform. I think we need ranked choice voting in a very serious way. I think we need public campaign financing, open primaries. We need to try and open up our political system so it's genuinely responsive. And I've gotten very dispirited by the lack of stimulus coming out of Congress, which you can blame Trump on Trump. But the fact is, if you had a functional Congress, we already would have passed these bills. They could have hammered it out even without White House leadership. And the fact that they haven't, to me, just indicates how sick our political process is. It's one reason why everyone's so disappointed and angry. And so I think there are some real changes you need to make structurally that in order to make our government more responsive. Right now, we got this old kludgy set of machines, and then we're yelling at it, being like, work better, work better. You know what I mean? And it's like everyone's yelling, getting mad. So option one is go inside the machine and being like, okay, like maybe you put some grease here and you do this and like try and make the machine work better. I think that's going to be a necessity to get universal basic income and some other things passed. I think you need to fix the machines of government to get them to listen to people. At this point, a lot of people think a lot of things, including universal basic income, but our government's not really up to the challenge of passing those kinds of policies right now.
The best title I love for you, Andrew, that will stay the same title as long as we got air in our lungs is leader of a movement leader. Because whether you're in the White House or not, like we're not letting this effort and the people that we're fighting for, not letting that go away for nothing, you know? So on that note, I want to thank Andrew and Julian for your time. I'll give you a Zoom awkward round of applause. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back to Don Sun for basically to bring this thing home. Thank you, Don. You are the man.
Thank you, everyone. You make it possible so that we feel like we can just get awesome things done. Campaigning, post-campaign, in government, outside of government. We can do it all. Am I right? Yeah, that's this community. Thank you all.
Thank you. I just make a final announcement, and we're going to have one more event this month for the with the co-founder of YouTube. It's Stephen Chen. It's on the October 29th. And thank you, Julian. It's a very, very informative, the lecture and education. And the first time I met with you, I know you can deliver the educational talk with all the owners here. It's we don't know how to run government and how to fill the position. Thank you for educational talk with Andrew.
It's a pleasure. Get out and vote, though. I have to say, gotta vote.
Yeah, let's get out.
Vote early, vote often.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.